Hello, everyone. This is Sean from the Soccer Nostalgia blog. I have the pleasure to interview former goalkeeper, football data analyst, and writer, Mr. Daniel Campos. Mr. Campos was previously interviewed on the blog about the career of Marcelo Salas. This video interview will serve as a companion piece to a written blog presentation on the career trajectory of Chilean legend and striker Ivan Zamorano. Hello, Daniel. Welcome back.
Hi, Shahan. Thank you for having me on this podcast edition. I think it's brilliant. I think football's a kind of game that brings everybody together, unites the world, men, women, regardless of race, ethnicity, religion, gender. It's a truly world game. So it's a pleasure to be on the show once again.
Thank you. Let's start off by describing the early life of Ivan Zamorano.
Fantastic question. I think it's a little difficult to begin because, if you look at a scope of the best players in the game, Johan Cruyff, or even way back to the 30s, Brazil with, so we're talking about South America here in Chile, and Brazil is very similar to Chile in the fact that it's a very hierarchical society, very stark in contrast. You either have or you don't have. It's a have and have nots. You're wealthy or that's it. So that social inequality and disparity can be very stark and shocking, culturally shocking. And Zamorano's early life, if we go back to Brazil, the first idol is Arthur Friedenreich, the first of colored skin in Brazil. He comes from an impoverished background. You look at Johan Cruyff in Europe, from the Netherlands, from social housing, impoverished background. Ivan Zamorano's no different. And Diego Maradona, Pelé, to play footballs to get out of that impoverished background, and it's a way out of poverty. Now, I'm not to say, and he's by his own admission, he doesn't come from an extremely poor family background. No, because he comes from a more working background. His dad working in factories. However, his father passes away and he's only 11 years old, 12 years old at best. And his father taught him how to play the game. His father taught him to become a Colo-Colo follower fan. So that was injected into him in the household. But when dad passes away, and he was a child, it was his mother who had to take responsibility in the home and obviously to make ends meet. And Ivan Zamorano had an older sister. He was born in 1967 and he comes from the second most popular neighborhood in the country, southwest of Santiago, in Maipú. Maipú and Puente Alto are the biggest neighborhoods. We're talking up to 1 million inhabitants, big suburb, and obviously, you can hop in the car for a drive, and you'll have to put the brakes because there's kids playing in the streets, and that's exactly how Zamorano began. In the streets, playing with his neighbors, his mates, going to school. You're playing at school. You're playing at lunchtime. You finish school. You're still kicking a ball. So that was his childhood.
Can you describe his football beginnings at Cobresal?
He's playing in the amateur leagues. He witnessed his father play, Luis, and obviously, as I just mentioned, he passes away. But his father was a decent player himself in the amateur leagues, and the setup, the norm in South America is for the amateur clubs. Picture the amateur clubs in dirt pitches. There's no grass, and the amateur clubs are what we can say satellite clubs, where the professional clubs use geographic catchment areas, if you can call it, to network, their antennas and scout talent. And Zamorano was scouted by a club which paradoxically is located in the far north of the country, completely outside the capital city. Remember, Chile's main economy is copper extraction, the mining primary industry. So you think, what does Cobresal have to do with Santiago? But Puente Alto and Maipú, the two biggest neighborhoods, are directly linked with Cobresal. They've got a training base in Santiago, And they've done that very smartly because they do it. They've got their training facility and their youth teams in the two most popular neighborhoods. So Cobresal is a club which, funnily enough, they're top of the ladder at the moment in the league. So they're doing something right. But they're based in El Salvador, in the desert, the driest, part of the world, the most arid desert in the world, in the far north of Chile. So you've got the biggest copper mines nearby off the freeway, and there's this little strip of grass which happens to be the football field, one of the most expensive football pitches in the world. And you think, why? Because it's a mining town. It's very expensive to maintain because of the scarcity of water. Zamorano got picked up 15, 16 years of age, and he gets loaned to a regional city, Los Andes, right on the border with the mountains with Argentina. You cross into Mendoza, and he plays for Trasandino. And Trasandinos at the time was called, because there was a military dictatorship, it was called Cobre Andino. Now, the military dictatorship played its role, unfortunately, because the country is obviously under military rule and authoritarian, autocratic, iron fist rule. People living in fear. And during this dictatorship, again, another paradox, because a few of the football clubs were disbanded, they were dismantled as sporting corporations. Some of the clubs were funded by the state. They were dismantled. Remember, this is the toppling in 1973 of Salvador Allende, and these clubs no longer exist. So if we look at history as well, the Iron Curtain, the Soviet Union was a world power in world football. There's a similarity there. And Cobresal is formed, as well as Cobreloa from Calama, from the mining companies, both obviously to a larger extent, state-owned, from Codelco, which is the Chilean copper company, state-owned company. So if you happen to be a miner, you work in the mines, hard work, 12-hour shifts, very, very sacrificed working life, labor life. Part of your pay goes to the club, and you get membership as well to the club. And that's where Zamorano he basically started scoring for fun. In fact, there's a local football legend that still goes round, that the first manager to win the English Premier League outside of Europe, so the first non-European manager, Manuel Pellegrini, who went to Manchester City, was still a defender for Giants Universidad de Chile. He was a central defender, playing in the cup against Cobresal. A young 17-year-old Zamorano outjumps him. And that's the day Pellegrini decides, that's it, I'm retiring, I'm hanging my boots. It's an insult. How can a 17-year-old outjump me? So that's an indication of the future and the potential of Zamorano as a 17-year-old. He scores, look for the record, he scores 22 goals and he turns 20. So that's roughly, the idea. We're talking 1987. So in 1985, scores 27 goals, and by 1987, he moves back to Cobresal. They win the Chilean Cup, the Copa Chile. He's subject to the big three clubs in Chilean football: Colo-Colo, Universidad Católica, Universidad de Chile. What are we going to do with this young, exciting prospect?
How did he get his first nickname, Bam Bam?
It's a good question, because that happens during the Cup, the Copa Chile, in Cobresal, in El Salvador. There's a commentator. And the thing is, Cobresal did really well because, if you're playing at a club at home in El Salvador where you've got to fly 3 hours by plane to get there to the mining town, it's a big advantage for the home team. So it's a lot of traveling, and also involves traveling on away fixtures. But they make their home matches very strong. They're a very good, difficult team to beat. And Zamorano, I don't remember exactly the opposition. He scores a double in a header, and it's halftime. He's walking to the dressing room, obviously with his teammates, for the halftime address under manager Manuel Rodriguez, who was a fantastic national team player as well. And the commentator, one of the radio commentators, not television commentators, puts a microphone to Zamorano and he says, you know, you remind me of the cartoon series, The Flintstones. You know, one of the little children who was restless and very energetic. He's called Bam Bam. So Barney's little boy. And he quite found it amusing. That nickname stuck and it fits as well, Ivan Bam Bam.
How did the transfer to Europe and Bologna come about? And if you could describe his early troubles there.
Well, Cobresal as well, like I mentioned, is financially, it's a very small club, but financially very stable. They've got, they've got the biggest mining company, or one of, in the world backing up the club. So money is not an issue. But the thing is, if you've got a big prospect of a player in Zamorano scoring nearly 30 goals a season, and the kid's not even 20. So in 2 seasons, he scored 30, 40, 49 goals in 2 seasons. We've got to sell him to the big. I mean, he was subject to a lot of. It was a tug of war with, again, like I said, the three big clubs. Colo Colo. He's a fan of Colo Colo. He grew up as a Colo Colo fan. Católica. Católica is another wealthy club. Universidad Chile, a very popular club. And Colo Colo, again, 1988, to set the tone, the country's going through a referendum, a plebiscite, to vote in or vote out for democracy to come back. So it marked the fall of the military dictatorship under Augusto Pinochet. And Pinochet, this is another myth that still needs a lot of clarification. He promised, obviously, politics involved here. South America, football and politics go hand in hand, and he promises to finish the construction of the stadium for Colo Colo. Long story short, he loses the plebiscite. Democracy is restored in the country. We're talking about over 5,000, 6,000, 7,000 people who disappear in a 17-year dictatorship. That's a promise to restore the Estadio Monumental David Arellano, the stadium that Colo Colo calls home. What do we do? As a true politician, he fails to deliver. What does the club do? Let's sell striker Hugo Rubio, who's also scoring a bag of goals. And with his agent, who to this day doesn't reveal his name, he says, what if we offer Hugo Rubio from Colo Colo to Bologna with Ivan Zamorano, 2-for-1? Combined, you've got 80 goals between the two. And Bologna, obviously, in the Serie A, we're talking hands down the best league in the world at the time. Maradona at Napoli, AC Milan, Juventus, Michel Platini. Bologna accept. And it became a problem because, first of all, this is prior to the Bosman ruling. There's only two foreigners at a club. And Zamorano was, at first impression, did not convince the coaching staff because of his physique. Too skinny. He needs to beef up a bit. He needs first team experience in Europe. So he gets loaned to St. Gallen. Problem is, Hugo Rubio did not convince the coaching staff as well. So Hugo Rubio moves to St. Gallen as well. So that's part of the the answer to the question why didn't he settle in Bologna?
Describe this phase of his career in the Swiss league with St. Gallen.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. It wasn't a common destination. You think you come from South America, Italian Serie A is more akin to South America. Brazilians move to Portugal. You move to Spain, the mother country, culturally, linguistically, there's no issues with the language. But Switzerland, you need to learn German, whether depending on what canton you move, French, German, Italian. This is the German part of Switzerland, but it didn't turn out too bad. Patricio Mardones, a very talented midfielder, also moves there, and Zamorano and Rubio, and they adapt very well. They start scoring again, plenty of goals in the Swiss league, and that opened doors. St. Gallen later signed Fabian Estay, they signed Luca Tudor, who did a very good 1987 Under-20 World Cup, also hosted in Chile. So it opened doors. And that's where he adapts very well. He becomes a league top scorer in 1989 to 1990, the top scorer in the Swiss league.
Discuss how he earned his second nickname, Ivan Le Terrible, in Switzerland.
Le Terrible, yeah, in French, the terrible. He's already nicknamed Bam Bam, and that was baptized. So I guess Zamorano's got two nicknames in the Spanish-speaking world, and in across Latin America is Bam Bam, but in the rest of continental Europe, he's the terrible, literally.
There's a story also. I think he scored in one game against Neuchâtel Xamax. He scored 4 goals. The Franco-Swiss television made a report on him, and that was also part of how he got this nickname.
That's
when
correct.
they made this report, the television report.
Yeah, that's correct. And for Zamorano to score four against Xamax, yeah, no doubt it was a sign of big things to come later on.
Let's describe his transfer to Spain in 1990 and his two contrasting seasons at Sevilla.
Well,
what can you say about this stage of his career?
I personally, looking back, that believe, contrary to what many journalists look back, I believe that it's not his move from Sevilla later to Real Madrid, even though I'm jumping the gun here. It's his move from St. Gallen, Bologna to St. Gallen. He never gets to play in Bologna. From St. Gallen to Seville is the biggest move of his career. Why? Because Sevilla and the Spanish Primera División, La Liga, was, to be fair, the perfect setting for Zamorano to play. And that was a league where he deserves to be playing, more fitting. Language is no barrier. The manager, Sevilla, is also familiar with Chilean football. He's an Argentinian Chilean manager, naturalized Chilean citizen. Vicente Cantatore, ex-player of my team, Santiago Wanderers, here in Valparaiso. Very experienced manager, very experienced coach. And Sevilla had a very, very competitive team, but a bit underperformed, disappointing in certain matches. Not to forget that Carlos Bilardo later arrives at Sevilla, and Diego Maradona also arrives. Zamorano also scores an array of goals. Davor Šuker, Croatian goal machine, also arrives, a bit later. So he sets the standard for the kind of striker to play at the Sanchez Pizjuan Stadium. For the record, 23 goals across 65 matches in all competitions and 11 assists.
Can you discuss how he earned his third nickname, the Helicopter?
Well, yeah, I think the Helicopter is a very fitting, nickname, because if you ask football fans across the world, Ivan Zamorano, you immediately think of Chile. He put Chile on the world map. But one of his most prolific attributes to his game was just how good Zamorano was in the air. It's how good he was at heading the ball. He was lethal. He could head the ball as good as anybody, and almost as if he was kicking the ball. That's how accurate and how fierce, how strong his heading was. So yeah, it's, I guess, a very fitting nickname, the Helicopter. Very skinny, no more than 1.72 m, 73 tall, but just his leap, the way he could jump off the ground was, there's plenty of footage these days just to see how good he was. His aerial play in the air, he was lethal. The best header in the ball in world football.
Let's discuss the Real Madrid stage of his career. And let's begin with his first 2 seasons there with Benito Floro as manager. In contrast to Sevilla, his first season was very impressive. The second one, 1993-94 season, not as much. How do you look at those seasons?
Yeah, it's funny because he moves from Sevilla with Vicente Cantatore to, in fact, the season starts at Real Madrid, and Real Madrid is Real Madrid. Arguably one of the biggest, if not the biggest club in world football. One of, definitely. That's open for debate. And Real Madrid, if I'm not wrong, I think it was Lorenzo Sanz, the president, Real Madrid, when you play at Real Madrid, it's the rivalry with Barcelona, but expectations are very high. You've got to win the league. That's expectations. You don't win the league, it's a fail, you know. So it's a disaster. And contrary to a lot of insistence from Benito Floro, he insists the club board let's sign the striker from Sevilla. And finally, Zamorano took time to adapt at Sevilla into his second season, but he arrives at Real Madrid straight away, 1993, 1994, and he's coming off from 1991, which we'll talk about soon, where Chile, two things for Chile in the national team. They get banned for the 1990 and 1994 World Cups, but we'll explain that a little later. And Chile host the 1991 Copa America, and Zamorano performed extremely well. And that obviously contributes to his signing in Spain. Moving to Real Madrid is a big step, of course. And in Chile, it becomes huge, huge news, front news, every day in the newspaper, television, broadcast dealing rights now for free to air. The Spanish league is now on free to air television because the whole country is glued to the television set to follow Zamorano's season. And he was very impressive. Probably the toughest as well. He had to adjust. It's a step up from Switzerland and Sevilla. But Benito Floro had come from Albacete, and he pushed and he pushed. And he signs for 3.1 million euros. That's about $6 million US, or 500 million pesetas, which obviously in Spain, they made the switch in 1999 from pesetas to euros. But the funny thing, there's a funny story he admits years later. He didn't believe, he thought it was a prank. You're moving to Real Madrid, his agent negotiates. Zamorano moves to Santiago for 10 days to meet up with his family, his sister, his mum. His sister's getting married. And he receives his phone call, picks up the phone. Well, no mobiles, but he could afford a mobile phone, which was still rare at the time. Gets another message, and he says, "Look, it's your agent. He's at a public civil service office at the wedding," and he says, the agent says, "I've got amazing news for you. I've got good news. You have to show up at the Santiago Bernabéu tomorrow." And he's like, "Come on, stop. Are you joking?" "No, I need you in Madrid tomorrow." "Well, that's impossible. I'm in Santiago. I'm at my sister's wedding." "Well, you're gonna have to catch the next flight to Madrid." And he did immediately and signs on the dotted line. But yeah, again, Real Madrid wanted, they were under Leo Beenhakker, the Dutch manager, and Beenhakker wanted Jurgen Klinsmann, but that didn't materialize. So imagine Real Madrid with Klinsmann, still a very, very, very good signing if that had happened. But that didn't, thankfully, and Zamorano got the nod. But yeah, it was disappointing for Real Madrid. Beenhakker lost in the last round, spoiled a 2-goal lead against Tenerife, and Johan Cruyff's dream team of Barcelona win the 1992-93 La Liga season. But Zamorano was having a dry spell. He was struggling as well to score. But again, like I said, he's generated television interest back home with the broadcasting rights. So the whole country's behind him.
Now, when Jorge Valdano is appointed as Real Madrid manager in 1994, he wanted Zamorano to leave. Why was this?
This is a story that to this day we're in South America, we're in Chile. Chile's football mad. Argentina's 10 times mad. Brazil is 50 times mad. Everything you do throughout the course of the day, there's always football in the conversation. You catch a taxi, the taxi driver will talk football. You buy the milk, the local corner shop, and everyone's talking football. Everyone to this day talks about this. Why? Because Zamorano became a national ambassador for Chile. Jorge Valdano, who obviously won the 1986 World Cup with Carlos Velardo, was a very good player himself, became public enemy number 1 in Chile. And this is still obviously adding more fuel to the fire, because Chile and Argentina almost went to war with neighboring countries. And had it not been in 1987 for the Pope, John Paul II, both countries would have gone to, they were this close to going to war. So Jorge Valdano is public enemy number one. And Zamorano years later admits that he thanks Valdano's very, I guess, cold, very authoritative, but also very honest address and character and personality. Valdano wasn't very close to Zamorano, but he calls him in at at Valdebebas, the training complex at Madrid for Real Madrid, and calls him to his office and says, "Listen, Ivan, you will be my number 5 striker. So we're going to put you on the market, and I'm sorry, but we're going to offload you. We're going to sell you." So yeah, you think, well, why was this? Again, he's bought to Real Madrid to replace an amazing striker, Hugo Sanchez from Mexico. Big shoes to fill, but Valdano, after he tells Zamorano, "You're the 5th striker," I mean, what do you do? Well, most strikers would, I guess, settle for that and move to another club, but Zamorano was not convinced. And I think this describes his personality, his perseverance, his dedication, his very strong-minded character, very determined, and it didn't convince him. Zamorano said, "I'm going to convince the coach that he's wrong." In front of Zamorano, in the pecking order was Juan Snyder, very decent striker from Argentina. And then a Spanish goal-scoring legend, Emilio Butragueño, Alfonso Perez. You've got 3 top strikers. Then you've got Peter Dubovsky. And then an upcoming other striker as well, here and there. And Jose Emilio Amavisca, who was a midfielder, winger, also could be a makeshift striker. And then Zamorano. So competition was very, very, very competitive. And Raúl, a very young Raúl González, is, creeping up in the first team. But Zamorano said he will stay. And this story gets revealed in the newspapers years later. It's normal to have a squad of 18, 25 players. It wasn't 25, but training sessions, 11v11, and Valdano decided to step in and play. And there's a 50-50 ball, and Zamorano tackles Valdano. And Valdano, with his assistant manager, Angel Capa, fantastic coach in his own right as well, and he says to him, "Hey, we're talking about Zamorano with wounded pride. His pride and his ego is wounded, and he's a relentless competitor. And when he tackles him, he tackles the coach. And Valdano gets up and he says, "Hey, relax. Is this how you always play?" And when he tackles him, he knees him. He knees Valdano in the cheekbone, and Valdano elbows him in return and says, "Do you always train as hard like this?" Obviously with his Argentinian Spanish accent. "Or is it because you hate the coach?" And Zamorano says, "This is how I always train. I train the way I play, and I play the way I train." And that's how he earned his respect. And Valdano realized that Zamorano wasn't someone to mess about.
Zamorano and Valdano would have an excellent season in this 1994-95 season, and Real Madrid would win the league title with Zamorano as Pichichi.
Yes, Pichichi, correct. And the following week after this altercation at training where Zamorano earns Valdano's respect, there's a match, funnily enough, against his old club. We call it in Spanish La Ley del Ex, the law of the ex. He's playing against Sevilla, and in 10 minutes, he scores 2 goals. And after 4 rounds in the league, and La Liga, he scores 7 goals. So you have to be stupid for Valdano to leave him on the bench. He gained his respect for the record. He's Pichichi. Still remember the whole country just completely glued to the television live. The last round of the season against Deportivo La Coruña, and Zamorano scores that beautiful volley, and he hits the post, and it almost goes out, but it hits the post and bounces in, because it was neck and neck with Deportivo La Coruña. I mean, how times have changed, and look at where the club is today. But yeah, and Zamorano also scored a hat-trick in the Clásico against Barcelona. And it wasn't no ordinary Barcelona. It was a dream team of Johan Cruyff. 173 appearances for Real Madrid, and Zamorano scored 101 goals in total, including that famous hat trick against Barcelona in the 1994-95 season. Scores 28 goals, wins a complete whole list of accolades and awards as Pichichi.
So now let's discuss his national team career. With the 1991 Copa America and also playing in the World Cup in 1998. Can you discuss this trajectory?
Yeah, it's a brilliant question. I think it takes a long time as well to answer, because while I can currently talk about Zamorano and his club career, you look at the way he progresses from Cobresal, St. Gallen, well, on loan as well, and then back to Cobresal, Bologna. He doesn't end up playing Cobresal, and then Cobresal to Sevilla, Real Madrid. It's a big jump, big jump. But in between, there's obviously a FIFA calendar and national team duty. And I'm going back now to what we briefly described. Roberto Condor Rojas, the goalkeeper for Chile, amazing goalkeeper with Sao Paulo in Brazil. He's tempted to go to Real Madrid. At the time, there was talk. He was the greatest at the time, the best goalkeeper in the world. He was unstoppable. The reason why his nickname was the Condor. He would dive from post to post. But when he fakes his injury at the cathedral of world football, I mean, for people in the English-speaking world, Wembley Stadium is the cathedral. But I'm sorry, the cathedral of world football is in Maracanã in Rio. And Roberto Rojas does the biggest mistake of his life. He cuts, with a scalpel, he cuts his forehead and plans a flare to be thrown from the stands. And this to provoke Brazil, because the chances of Chile qualifying to the Italian 90 World Cup was slim. You're playing against Brazil. And it brought the game into disrepute. Chile walks off the field. Days later, FIFA catches that this was planned. It was a cheat to deceive Brazil and FIFA. And João Havelange, being Brazilian, the FIFA president, decides to suspend Chile for 1990 and 1994. Zamorano was in that team. He was, my maths served me right, he's 22, 23 years old. So that ostracizes, it cuts a generation, 1990, 1994. Thankfully, he moves into the 1998 qualifiers for France 98. But in between, there's a Copa America 91 at home. Chile finished third. Despite the subsequent ban of 2 World Cups, Chile does really well. Zamorano scores 4 goals at home against Venezuela, against Peru, Paraguay, with José Luis Chilaver, one of the best goalkeepers ever. In Colombia with Freddy Rincon, Carlos Valderrama. But he opens a door, despite Chile's ban. At the time, nobody wanted to play Chile. It was the last team you wanted to play in FIFA friendlies. So that's something I want to really highlight. Whether he was a Cobresal, Bologna, he never played for Bologna, St. Gallen, Zamorano, always, and I stress this with capital letters, always said yes to the national team, whether he was in the most remote village in Switzerland, or he was playing at the time Intertoto, UEFA Cup matches, or Swiss Cup matches, or in Spain in the middle of winter in Spain, and maybe playing away in Oviedo or Santander. He would always catch the nearest flight to Madrid or to the capital city and fly back to Chile, or away to Canada, to Mexico, to Ecuador, to Bolivia, play friendly matches. It was even a friendly match against France with Aimé Jacquet. Zamorano was always present. He was always shown his leadership and his allegiance to the national team. He never said no. He was always present for the national team.
Yes, and he would finally make it to his World Cup in 1998 with Salas as his partner.
Yeah, well, we're jumping a bit there, because by 1995, there's a new, Javier Escargorta from Spain was the manager, and that was a complete chaos. It was a fiasco. The football was poor, the results were poor. He didn't know how to really manage the press, just answering press conferences with the most absurd, references. Wasn't the best manager, and this was the manager who took Bolivia to USA 94. And there was a friendly in Los Angeles, funny enough, at the Rose Bowl, where Chile beats Mexico 2-1, and Zamorano scores a brace So there was a bit of hope there. Like I said, Zamorano always put his hand up for the national team. It's a friendly against Australia, funnily enough, my other country, my native country. In Antofagasta, 3-0 win, 2 goals by Zamorano, 1 goal by Esteban Valencia. And they're the kind of matches to prepare for World Cup qualifying for France. And we're talking the toughest World Cup qualifying in the world, South America. It's 10 teams. Brazil qualified, obviously, as World Cup champions in 1994. So a 9-team round robin, 2 rounds, so 18 matches. Zamorano becomes a top scorer in qualifying. And that's where his partnership with Marcelo Salas begins. That's where the deadly Sasa strike duo began. Now, Zamorano's debut was in 1986, so a long time back in Lima against Peru. His first qualifying goal was for Italian 1989 against Venezuela away in Caracas. So imagine the heat and the humidity. So he had already scored. We'll get to that a bit later with some pretty interesting facts about his international career in a few moments' time.
So now let's discuss the Internazionale Milano phase of his career in the Italian Serie A with Ronaldo and the famous 1+8 kit. And what was the takeaway from his Italian spell?
Yeah, well, Inter Milan is known as the international team. It's no surprise. That's why they call it Internazionale. It's always been the club in Italian football with Giuseppe Meazza, Giacinto Facchetti. They're known as the club to recruit international foreign players. Now, he's a top scorer in Spain, Pichichi. He's also the top scorer with 10 goals in World Cup qualifying CONMEBOL. Chile qualify after 16 years since Spain 1982 to first World Cup in France 98. The country's gone mad. There's national holidays for the matches. People fly with credit cards to France. People say that it took them 15 years to pay off their credit cards, all to support the national team. It was, South American countries, football mad, as I say. He moves, but this is in 98. Chile qualify, beating Bolivia 3-0 in November. And that was the year 97 where he moves, 96, 97 to Milan. But it was former player Luis Suarez, not to be confused with his namesake, Uruguayan, Spanish legend Luis Suarez, who was a football director working as an agent as well. He convinces Massimo Moratti, obviously the renowned owner of Inter Milan and Pirelli, the tire company. But Massimo Moratti was sort of not convinced, at the time. But Inter Milan had already looked at South America. Roberto Carlos is left back from Palmeiras. Javier Zanetti, right back from Banfield. They looked, they had Ruben Sosa, the Uruguayan striker. They were familiar with South Americans. But it was Juventus after Zamorano, the Pichichi, and Bayern Munich. And you think, hypothetically, very, very competitive clubs that would have suited Zamorano as well. And that's something that Zamorano reveals many years later. Juventus and Bayern Munich were after him. But Luis Suarez did his work, convinces Moratti. He moves to Milan, fashion capital of the world. You got the San Siro, the derby against AC Milan. One of his, obviously, his highlights is lifting the UEFA Cup in 1998 in May. Win over Lazio. You can always remember that amazing dribble by Ronaldo beating Luca Marchegiani, fainting one way or another. But you look at Inter Milan, it was just incredible. Ronaldo's there, Roberto Baggio, his creativity, a very young Andrea Pirlo, formidable defense as well, Christian Vieri as well. So incredible team. And Zamorano also, he tells his story at a TEDx conference, a motivational speaking conference to corporates. And he says, I had to decide whether to put myself on the line for the team. I've got no chance. Again, back in Real Madrid, he's number 5 by Jorge Valdano. How do I convince the coach to become the first choice striker? And he says, how am I going to convince the coach, Gigi Simone at Internazionale, of becoming number 1 When I've got Ronaldo, I've got Christian Vieri, I've got other amazing strikers in front of me. And what did he do? Well, he gave up his number. He was number 9, gives up his number to Ronaldo. So he comes up with this genius idea of 1+8. And he also admits that Vieri doesn't head the ball. Ronaldo doesn't head the ball. They can dribble, they can shoot, but they don't head the ball. I can head the ball better than anyone. So he decides to work his butt off at training, and it pays off. He becomes a kind of striker that plays more for the team instead of individually. But it was the best league in the world, Serie A. They win the UEFA Cup. But for many fans, Zamoranos remember for that iconic vintage jersey for collectors.
What are your memories of his participation in the 2000 Olympics in Australia as one of the 3 authorized overage players?
Yeah, we're jumping the gun a little for about a year and a half, because he plays the World Cup. Finally, every footballer's dream to play a World Cup. He didn't score. In the World Cup. His only World Cup, Chile draw to Italy 2-2. Zamorano knows everyone from the Italian team playing at Inter, and Cesare Maldini, Paolo Maldini's father. 2-2 draw in Bordeaux, a horrible 1-1 draw to Austria, a 1-1 draw against Cameroon, 3 draws, qualified to the round of 16, 4-1 loss to Brazil, his teammates with Ronaldo. And so the next big tournament is the Sydney Games. And I can be going on for 10 minutes how miraculously Chile qualifies for the Sydney Games. It was played in Londrina, in Brazil, a town close to the Amazon. And Chile were mathematically, if you got your calculator, was eliminated. And they drew under 23, obviously, Olympic tournament. They drew to Brazil. Amazing performance by David Pizarro, who later goes to Inter. From Udinese, plays at Manchester City, Roma. Fantastic performance there. And the Chilean team are back in the hotel, and they're splitting up to catch the flight back to Santiago. They're playing. And they're watching on the television screen. Brazil had to beat Colombia by 9 goals. What did Brazil do? They beat them 10-0. So mathematically, Chile had a chance to play against Argentina. So half the squad and the coaching staff arrive at the airport, book another flight back to return to Londrina. And there it was the last fixture to qualify. This is a spot for the Olympics. They're playing Argentina. Fabrizio Colocini, Esteban Cambiaso. Brilliant team. I think even Lionel Scaloni, World Cup winning coach now at Qatar, he's in the team as well. So it's basically the backbone of Hugo Tocali, Nestor Peckerman, the under-17, under-20s champion World Cup team from Argentina, Malaysia, 95. Amazing generation of Argentinian talent. And Chile win 1-0. In the 92nd minute, goal by Hector Tapia. Hector Tapia later moves to Lille in France and Perugia. And that takes Chile to the Olympics. Now, Hector Tapia, while training in Melbourne, these are my memories. I'm a Sydney boy. I moved to Melbourne with my dad. The country's on a public holiday because you're hosting the Olympics. My mother, in fact, was a volunteer at the games. And I go with my dad. We stay at the same hotel as the national team. In fact, the doctor for the national team was the same doctor for my dad. My dad, well, he almost played at the professional ranks as well, had it not been for an injury, but he knew the doctor. So we stayed at the hotel, and it was almost makeshift. Hector Tapia gets injured at training. And obviously, under 23 football involves 3 overage players by FIFA rule. Remember, it's not a fully FIFA tournament. It's also IOC. It's a brilliant Olympics. Andrea Pirlo for Italy, Samuel Eto'o for Cameroon, Carlos Puyol, Xavi for Spain, and Chile about to play Morocco in the first game. Nelson Tapia is the goalkeeper for Chile. Pedro Reyes, who after the World Cup moves to Auxerre in France. There was talk of bringing in Javier Margas, who just left Harry Redknapp and West Ham. Brilliant defender. But Hector Tapia gets injured. We need another striker, and Zamorano's at Inter. Didn't get much playing time in season 2000. So he thinks, and he says, well, why don't Marcelo Salas go? Salas was at Lazio, and he says, I need to, I don't want to lose my spot. under Sven-Goran Eriksson. And he phoned Zamorano, why don't you go? Why don't you go? No, why don't you go? Tussle. Zamorano goes, yeah, you're right, because I'm older. Maybe we'll qualify to the Athens games 4 years later, and you can go. I need to convince the coach, the Inter coach. So maybe if I do a good Olympics, I'll get back into the starting lineup at Inter. So Zamorano grabs gets on the next plane from Milan, arrives at Melbourne, and he scores a hat-trick after 55 minutes, 4-1 demolition at the Melbourne Cricket Ground. I still remember the game like as if it was yesterday. And thankfully Inter Milan sorted out his release, because obviously Italy also qualified. And Nicola Ventola was a great team, Cristiano Abbiati for Italy. Italy just beat hosts Australia 1-0. That's how good of a team Australia was as well. But Zamorano at the Olympics was incredible. Then there was a 3-1 win over Spain, just on the eve of Chile's Independence Day on the 18th of September. There were 30,000 Chilean fans. This is away from overseas, away from Chile. 30,000 screaming fans in Melbourne at the cricket ground. So it was a home match away from home. And then a 4-1 win over gold medalists, Atlanta 96 medalist Nigeria. There was in between there's the final group match, 2-1 loss in Adelaide to Korea. But Chile were inspirational, 4-1 win. And then the semi-final loss, Carlos Kameni, the goalkeeper at Espanyol, the Cameroonian goalkeeper, was simply sensational. I think he was possessed by somebody because he stopped everything. Yeah, there was one goal opportunity missed by Sebastián González, Claudio Maldonado, and someone else furious because Chile lose 2-1. I don't want to talk about that match. I've always said personally there's 3 games I never want to speak about. One happens to be Australia versus Iran at the same ground, the Melbourne Cricket Ground. So there's 2 games at the MCG. I was there personally. I don't want to talk about them. So I'd like to skip to the 3rd bronze medal match at the Sydney Football Stadium, opposite to the hospital where I was born. So my old stomping ground. And the US was a very competitive side. Brian McBride, Jeff Agus, very young Landon Donovan, if I'm not wrong. And Brad Friedel was impeccable. But it took a very, very experienced Ivan Zamorano to get past Brad Friedel, including a late penalty. And that was history. Chile is not your most sporting country, very football mad country, but Chile is actually more successful in tennis. And so a bronze medal was historic for Chile in the Olympics. It's not a country that records or tallies a lot of medals in the Olympics medal tally.
Can you describe the final phase of Zamorano's career with the national team around 2001, as well as at club level at 2003?
This is a very good question because Zamorano is now a hero, idol status. He's with Marcelo Salas. He's spearheaded Chile to a World Cup after 16 years. He's taken Chile to a bronze medal. In fact, this is the jersey worn by one of the players, Rodrigo Núñez, for Chile in the Olympics. And from there, the national team goes downhill. There's a lot of expectation from that generation to replicate that success, having won the bronze medal, having first of all eliminated Argentina to get to the Olympics. Remember, there's only 2 spots from South America. And it's always a 99% guarantee is Brazil and Argentina. And Brazil gets knocked out as well with Alex and Ronaldinho. So the expectation in Chile is, we've got this young generation now, under 23, they can move up to the senior team. But Chile finished last in World Cup qualifying. In fact, a friend of mine was the manager, caretaker manager, Jorge Garcés. And after that incredible run, there's a lot of disappointment. But there was one highlight. Zamorano decides to call it a day, quits, and to hang up his boots. The country's in shock, but obviously, players can't play forever. And there's a friendly match in Santiago against none other than the World Cup champions, France. This is 2001, just before the South Korea-Japan World Cup a year later. 2-1 win at the stadium, National Stadium. Pablo Galdames on the score sheet. I think it was David Trezeguet, and you name it, Emmanuel Petit, Thierry Henry, Laurent Blanc, Zinedine Zidane. It's an amazing team for France. But that was his farewell in front of his home crowd. 69 appearances, 34 goals for the record. But then he decides to leave Inter Milan, and he fulfills his dream, his childhood dream with his father. He promised his father when he was a child, he promises his father, I'm going to play for Colo Colo. I'm going to make your dream come true. He moves to Santiago, but the deal collapses. But Zamorano and Colo Colo declares it bankruptcy. They win the league 2002, and the deal didn't fall. So, and he moves to one of the bigger clubs in the continent, and to a league, a franchise-based league, big money. Mexico, moves to America. So Mexico City is his next stomping ground. Santa Ursula, the Azteca Stadium. He wins the league title there, and to also just highlight just how football seems to work. If we go back to '93, Hugo Sanchez, Mexican, Real Madrid. Who was the coach at Real Madrid? Leo Benhaca, the Dutchman, and they lose on the final round to Barcelona. They lose the title, and then who's the coach at America? Leo Benhaca, and he didn't want Zamorano, and Zamorano arrives, and Benhaca welcomes Zamorano. So that's to show again Zamorano's character and persistence. He enjoys a very successful spell, and also alongside his good mate Fabian Estay. Yeah, so Estay. I mean, Club America has always been very friendly with Chileans, open. Javier Margas played there. Legend Carlos Reynoso. He's actually more Mexican than Chilean now. He's spent more of his life in Mexico. Mexico's always been Reynaldo Navia, and he's Zamorano's strike partner in the Sydney Olympics in 2000. Club America's always been open to Chileans. A very, very successful spell. And I think his time in Mexico opened doors, and we'll get to that a bit later on Zamorano.
Did he eventually end up at Colo Colo though, just before retiring?
Yes, in the business world, you need to have strong negotiation skills. You need to know, how to deal in business. And Zamorano, obviously, very wealthy, with his brother-in-law, and also with his former teammate, close friend Hugo Rubio. They start a football agency company to represent players. So he's got his business interests in Chile. To be honest, Zamorano could retire happily, but he had to fulfill his father's childhood dream of moving to Colo Colo. So he moves to Chile. But we're talking about someone who's just too popular, too famous in your home country. You're constantly pressed by the media. He's in the tabloids. He's in showbiz magazines. He's Zamorano going out with this girl, this other woman, this fashion model. Zamorano had a one night stand with Madonna and Naomi Campbell, and Argentinian models, and he's with another model, and he's engaged. So he's always in the front pages of showbiz as well. Many people disagreed for him to come back to Chile because he's just in the front pages every day. But he had to fulfill his father's dream, and he signed. And remember, Colo Colo is the biggest club, and it's bankrupt. They almost lost their stadium. They had to sell their assets. They sold the clubhouse. They sold the training facilities. They had to also organize a telethon, almost like today's, what do they call those donation websites? Fundraiser.
Right.
That's how bad Colo Colo. There was no hot water. Players had to shower back home. There was no hot water. We're talking about the biggest club in the country. There was no lights. They didn't even pay the bill for the floodlights. So Zamorano signs for Colo Colo for free of charge. In fact, it was Pepsi that signed Zamorano as his sponsor to pay for the ad honorem, his wages for Colo Colo, but it wasn't his wages, it was more to help the squad, the playing squad. Colo Colo was completely cash strapped. And also his childhood hero was 1974, 1982 World Cup striker Carlos Caselli, amazing striker for Colo Colo. So he plays free of charge. He secures his sponsorship revenue deal with Pepsi. He scores 8 goals for Colo Colo, but unfortunately on the pitch, He finishes up north in Calama. Great campaign for Colo-Colo. It was more of a mix of a youth team with experience with Zamorano, former player Jaime Pizarro's manager, and they play, Colo-Colo's arch nemesis. Colo-Colo has a rivalry, obviously, with the other big two, Universidad Católica, Universidad de Chile, especially Universidad de Chile. That's the derby of Chilean football. But there's always a rank outsider, arguably the most successful club outside of Santiago. We're talking about a club that reached the Copa Libertadores final in 81 and 82. They end up losing to Peñarol and Flamengo, headed by Zico. And that's Cobreloa. Cobreloa is a very successful club today in the wilderness in second division. Cobreloa defeats Colo-Colo with Zamorano in Calama. And Zamorano also gets sent off and for a very clumsy late challenge, but he insults the referee Carlos Chandia. There's a melee, there's a brawl on the pitch, and to think just how colorful and successful Zamorano's career was, especially in Spain and Italy, and his international career, for all those accolades and achievements, for that to end in that way, in that violent, aggressive way, very disappointing way to end your playing career in 2003. And the other paradox was that Cobreloa's manager was his national team manager, Nelson Acosta. But he retires, life becomes a bit tricky as well. His investments, remember I said his brother-in-law administered his investments, and he actually filed for bankruptcy and took his brother-in-law to court. And had to sell off all his assets. He loses most of his investments. So yeah, it was tricky. But again, his successful time in Mexico opens his doors to the Spanish language television networks in the USA. Obviously, the US is, probably even be the fourth biggest country, Spanish-speaking country, with over 40, 50 million Spanish speakers in the United States, especially California, Texas, Florida. He moves to Florida, to Miami, and he's actually neighbors with Hristo Stoichkov, the Bulgarian great in Miami. So Stoichkov obviously also speaks Spanish, and he works for TUDN, Univision. So he's a football pundit, commentator there, and also occasionally travels back to Chile. He's married as well to a former Argentinian model, has 2 kids. I think personally, I'm very happy for him because he's gone through he went through a lot of problems in his personal life, his public profile as well, financial problems, but that's all sorted, and he's living happily in Miami today.
In closing, is Ivan Zamorano considered one of the, if not the best Chilean player of his generation?
Of his generation, yes. In history, many would say it was, many say that the best Chilean player ever is Elias Figueroa, the defender. And I think I need to stress this for the English-speaking world. There's a lot of talk from England, from Germany. Daniel Pasarela was incredible as a defender for Argentina. Carlos Alberto in Mexico, 70 for Brazil. Elias Figueroa only played 9 matches in the World Cup, and all 3 matches were eliminations from the first round, three group games. He played as a 16-year-old in England, 66, and then in 74, 3 group matches against West Germany, East Germany, and Chile. Plays an incredible match, marking Gerd Müller. And then in 82, he's the first international player to play as a grandfather, because he was a father very young. Idol in Brazil for Internacional, so hands down, and 3 times voted best South American player of the year. So hands down, Elias Figueroa is the best Chilean player in history. But in this generation, I think number 2, number 3 will be Zamorano, Marcelo Salas. There's also Carlos Caselli, Arturo Vidal, Alexis Sanchez, younger, newer generation who are now getting old and starting to make way for an even younger generation. The Zamorano covering the late 80s, the 90s, the noughties. Zamorano hands down would be, Marcelo Salas is amazing. But Zamorano opened doors. Ivan Zamorano, again, and I reiterate, nobody wanted to play Chile because of the ban. There were 2 national teams banned by FIFA, Yugoslavia because of the Balkan War. But that's not Yugoslavia's fault. But Chile were banned because they brought the game into disrepute. Nobody wanted to play. But you think of Chile at the time, it was Marcelo Rios in tennis, world number one in the ATP Tour. Ivan Zamorano, Marcelo Salas. Zamorano opened doors for South Americans in Europe, especially for Chileans. And also to consider Marcelo Salas and Ivan Zamorano, Sasa partnership. 7, 8 goals by Salas in the World Cup qualifiers to France, 10 goals for Zamorano. That's a lethal partnership. And Brazil didn't even play the World Cup qualifiers as World Cup champions from USA 94, and they had Ronaldo and Romario. So, yes, to answer Zamorano, yeah. And also Zamorano played 4 Copa America tournaments as well. And he showed his leadership, like I said as well. Zamorano always put his hand up. Ivan always put his hand up to play for the national team. He missed 2 Copa America tournaments in Uruguay 95 and Bolivia 97 due to injury. But he played in, 4 Copa America tournaments. 87, 3rd place in 91 at home, and the Paraguay edition in 1999, which Chile finished 4th. Yep. Yeah. Best player in his generation, yes. Can we finish with a few fun facts on Zamorano?
Please go ahead, of course.
Yeah, you think of all the achievements he did. He never scored against Argentina in his international career. He scored against everyone in South America. Off the top of my head, always scored against Peru, Ecuador, Colombia, Uruguay, scored against Brazil, never scored against Bolivia and Argentina. He never scored a goal, as I mentioned, at a World Cup. He almost did against Austria. It was an amazing save by Michael Koncel. Runners-up, in 87, Copa America, 3rd place in 91, 4th place in Paraguay 99, like I said. Top scorer in the Sydney Olympics with 6 goals. His first international goal against European opposition, against France, 1994. It was in Lyon, Stade Geelong, 3-1 loss. I think you've got the video for that.
Yes, and I think that was the first time he was captain for the national team. First time
captain, Eric Cantona, Jean-Pierre Papin, great team. And he scored in debut 1987. He was only 20 years old against Peru. Yeah, he only played against 4 European national teams. So his first game was against Greece in Canada. Canada celebrated in 1995. Yes. So this, I think, if I'm not wrong, in Vancouver or in Edmonton, Commonwealth Stadium against Canada, France, and then against Italy and Austria in the World Cup. So he only played 4 European teams. He's also the godfather of his good mate Fabian Estay. They played together at America. Fabian Estay was also very influential in the negotiations to lure Zamorano to Club America, Las Águilas, Mexico City. I mentioned he lives in Miami, works in television. He made his Copa Libertadores debut with Club America. He's married to a former Argentinian model. So when he's interviewed with Argentinian media and television, newspapers, there's no democracy there with his wife. He's an Independiente fan because of his wife. But he also admitted not only to have never had scored against Argentina at national team level, but he admitted he probably retired a little earlier from Colo-Colo. Probably could have and should have moved to play club football in Argentina. That would have been wonderful. He scored 5 goals in the UEFA Champions League. That's that record as a Chilean. Yeah, it was being broken by Alexis Sanchez and Arturo Vidal. In fact, there was 1 goal I remember at Old Trafford. Well, it wasn't a goal. Almost a goal at Old Trafford. And Peter Schmeichel, with his trademark handball, save, the Danish brilliant goalkeeper that he was, denies him. Zamorano with a clear diving header. I remember him losing a UEFA Cup. Jens Lehmann denies him a penalty at the San Siro, the UEFA Cup final against Schalke. Schalke from the Bundesliga win the UEFA Cup. Then he wins the UEFA Cup with Inter in Paris against Lazio. 2 months before the World Cup at the same country in France. Top scorer in the qualifiers with 12 goals, not 10 goals. 12 goals in 10 matches, including 5 against Venezuela. And that match against Venezuela was at the Colo-Colo Stadium. So that stadium was to be his home ground a few years later for Colo-Colo. He's selected in the FIFA Top 100 by Pelé. Only 3 Chileans are in the Top 100 by Pelé. Elias Figueroa, 1962 World Cup star Leonel Sanchez, and Ivan Zamorano. Top goal scorer in the Torneo Verano, the Summer League tournament in Mexico, 2002. And like I said, he had his player agency with Hugo Rubio shortly after retirement, but his businesses didn't go as planned. But like I said, I'm very happy for him. He's a national treasure. He's an icon. To this day, he's still on television, betting agencies, commercials, advertisements, bus companies, automobile, credit cards, you name it, perfume. He's still in television, still has a presence on television. But I'm happy for him. He lives in Miami, works in Spanish-speaking media. So we're talking about a football legend here, a top 100 player on the FIFA list. So it's been a pleasure discussing Ivan Bam Zamorano, and it's just an amazing header of the ball, amazing striker in world football. So thank you very, very much indeed.
Thank you. So with that, I would like to thank you once more. And again, to remind everyone to please read the main blog article as well for more detail. The link is included in the video upload description, along with our respective contact information. Thank you once again.
Thank you.